On Christmas Eve, I came home without warning. I found my daughter shivering outside at 28 degrees Fahrenheit. No blanket to keep her warm, no coat to shield her from the bitter Alabama winter. My son-in-law's family was laughing inside, toasting with champagne by the fireplace, their voices carrying through the windows like cruel music. I kicked the door open, holding my daughter in my arms, and said 6 words that would change everything. "I'm glad you're all here." I stepped out of the taxi, my heavy boots sinking into the thin layer of ice covering the sidewalk outside my daughter's house in Birmingham, Alabama. The cold wind cut through my jacket like razor blades, forcing me to pull up my collar and hunch my shoulders against the assault. After 40 years as a taekwondo coach, I thought I was used to any challenge, from the sweltering heat of southern training halls to the harshest winters. But this Christmas Eve cold made me shiver in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. I stood there in front of the warmly lit house, a mix of excitement and nerves swirling inside me like a storm I couldn't control. Today I wanted to surprise Patricia, my little girl, my only child. I wanted to see her radiant smile when her mama showed up out of the blue after so many months away, training the national taekwondo team in Atlanta. My heart was racing with anticipation, with hope, with that particular joy only a mother feels when she's about to embrace her child after too long apart. The front yard was covered in a sheet of ice, not a single footprint in sight, like no one had bothered to salt the walkway or clear a path. Through the big picture window, I could see the cozy glow spilling out from the living room, where cheerful Christmas music played from somewhere inside. The song Silent Night drifted out, Patricia's favorite when she was a little girl, when she'd sit on my lap and make me sing it over and over until she fell asleep. I stepped closer to the window, trying to peek inside without being seen, wanting to preserve the surprise for just a moment longer. A long dining table draped in an elegant cream tablecloth stretched across my view, loaded with traditional holiday dishes that looked like something out of a magazine. A golden roasted turkey, steaming dishes of collard greens and cornbread dressing, a crystal bowl of cranberry sauce catching the light, and glasses of red wine glinting under the chandelier. The Crawford family, my son-in-law's people, was gathered in full force around that table. I recognized Thomas Crawford, Michael's father, sitting at the head with an air of authority that came from his years as a judge, his silver hair perfectly combed, his posture radiating entitlement. Margaret Crawford, his wife, held a glass of wine with a smug smile on her thin lips, her pearl necklace catching the firelight. Michael's sister Diana was there too, with her 2 young children laughing and running around the room, their joy a stark contrast to what I was about to discover. They were all raising their glasses, toasting around the crackling fireplace, their faces flushed with warmth and alcohol and the comfortable certainty that comes from never having known struggle. But where was Patricia? I frowned, straining to see further inside, scanning every corner of that warm, bright room, thinking maybe she was in the kitchen or had stepped away for a moment. I'd pictured her there at that table, smiling and chatting happily, like in the old days when she'd wrap her arms around my neck and tell me endless stories about her day. Then I heard it, a faint sound, barely audible over the wind and the muffled music from inside. A whimper, soft and broken, coming from somewhere nearby. I turned toward the sound, my heart beginning to pound with a dread I couldn't yet name, and that's when I saw her. Under the dim glow of the porch light, next to a snow-covered poinsettia planter that someone had left to freeze, Patricia was curled up in an old wooden rocking chair. She wore only a thin cotton blouse and a light skirt, clothes meant for a summer afternoon, not a winter night when the temperature had dropped to 28 degrees. Her frail shoulders shook uncontrollably, her body convulsing with cold. Her beautiful dark hair, usually so carefully styled, stuck to her forehead in wet strands, damp from melted ice and maybe tears. Her lips had taken on a bluish tint that made my blood run cold with terror. I ran to her, my heart pounding like a war drum in my chest, my breath coming in short gasps. "Patricia," I shouted, my voice breaking with panic and rage and a mother's primal fear. I yanked off my coaching jacket, the warm, down-filled one I'd worn on the flight from Atlanta, and wrapped it around her with urgent, trembling hands. When my fingers touched her arm, I nearly cried out. Her skin was ice cold, like touching marble in winter, like there was no warmth left in her body at all. Patricia lifted her face slowly, as if even that small movement took enormous effort. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying, her pale lips barely moving as she whispered, "Mama." Her voice was so faint it almost dissolved into the wind, carried away before I could fully hear it. Then she collapsed against my shoulder, her body going limp like a puppet with cut strings. I caught her, holding her weight, feeling how light she'd become, how fragile, like she'd been disappearing and no one had noticed or cared. I hugged her tightly, pulling her against my chest, trying to share my body heat, trying to will warmth back into her freezing limbs. "I'm here, baby girl. I'm here now," I whispered, my voice cracking as tears burned hot trails down my cold cheeks. I pulled an extra sweater from my travel bag, wrapping it around Patricia's shoulders, layering it over my jacket, doing everything I could to bring her back from the edge of hypothermia. Her soaked slippers fell off her feet into the ice, leaving a sad trail of evidence that she'd been out here for who knows how long. I lifted her in my arms, feeling her weak breath against my neck, each exhale a small cloud of vapor in the frigid air. She weighed almost nothing, this daughter who'd once been so strong, so full of life and laughter. In that moment, cradling her like I'd done when she was a baby, all I wanted was to get her warm, to get her safe, to get her away from whatever nightmare had brought her to this state. But then from inside the house, the laughter continued, careless and cruel, echoing through the walls like mockery. I could clearly hear Michael's deep voice, smug and boastful, bragging about something to his father, probably some case he'd won, or some promotion he was expecting. The whole table erupted in more laughter, and the clinking of crystal glasses sounded like distant, eerie bells celebrating something obscene. They were happy in there, cozy and warm by the fireplace, drinking expensive wine and eating their elaborate meal, while my daughter, my own flesh and blood, was trembling outside in the freezing cold like she didn't deserve to be in that house, like she was less than human. The rage that filled me in that moment was unlike anything I'd ever felt, not in the ring, not in competition, not even when I'd faced discrimination throughout my career. This was the rage of a mother whose child had been thrown away like garbage. I looked down at Patricia, her face pressed against my shoulder, her whole body shaking, and I made a decision. I adjusted my grip, holding her securely against my chest, and I walked toward that front door with purposeful, heavy steps that left deep prints in the ice. When I reached the door, I didn't knock. I didn't ring the bell. I lifted my leg, and I kicked that door open with every ounce of strength my 66 years of martial arts training had given me. The door flew inward with a crash that silenced the music and the laughter instantly. The doorframe splintered where the lock had been, wood cracking like a gunshot in the sudden quiet. I stepped through the threshold, holding Patricia in my arms like a sacred burden, and I looked at every single face frozen in shock around that dining table. Thomas Crawford had half risen from his chair, his mouth open in outrage. Margaret's wine glass had stopped halfway to her lips. Diana clutched her children protectively, though I was no threat to anyone except those who'd hurt my daughter. And Michael, my son-in-law, stood at the far end of the table with a look of pure guilt flashing across his face before he could mask it with indignation. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Thomas demanded, his voice booming with the authority he'd once wielded from a judge's bench. "You can't just break into private property." "Private property?" I repeated, my voice deadly calm despite the fury burning through every vein in my body. "This is my daughter's house, too. Or have you all forgotten that while you were toasting yourselves in here?" I looked pointedly at Patricia, still trembling in my arms, and then back at them. "I'm glad you're all here," I said, those 6 words carrying more weight than any verdict Thomas had ever pronounced, "because you're all going to witness what happens next." Margaret found her voice, shrill and defensive. "Juanita, You don't understand the situation." Patricia was being difficult. She refused to participate in our family gathering, so we gave her some time to reflect on her behavior. "Time to reflect," I said softly, dangerously, at 28 degrees, without a coat. "Is that how you Crawford folks teach lessons?" Michael stepped forward, his lawyer face on now, the one I'm sure he used in courtrooms to sound reasonable while saying monstrous things. "Mother Coleman, Patricia and I had a disagreement. She was being emotional and irrational. I suggested she get some fresh air to calm down." "Fresh air," I repeated, looking at my daughter's blue-tinged lips, her ice-cold skin. "Michael, I've known hypothermia. I've seen people die from it. Your wife was maybe an hour away from serious medical emergency, and you were in here drinking champagne. Just a few hours ago, everything had been different. I'd been at the Atlanta airport, still buzzing with energy from a successful week training the national taekwondo team for the upcoming championships. The heat of the training mat seemed to linger on me even as I'd stood in the busy airport terminal, dragging my old duffel bag, so excited I could hardly stand still. I'd been imagining Patricia's face lighting up when I showed up unannounced on Christmas Eve, the way she used to when she was a little girl and I'd come home from tournaments. My heart had been racing with anticipation, with joy, with plans for our reunion. She'd always been my light, ever since she was born, a tiny bundle with big eyes that looked at me like I was her whole world. Through her childhood, through her teenage years when we'd had our struggles, through her wedding to Michael that I'd had reservations about but supported because she loved him. Every time my coaching career took me away, I told myself it was to give her a better life, to pay for her education, to set an example of a strong woman pursuing her dreams. I'd sat in the airport waiting area for my connecting flight to Birmingham, pulling out my phone to call Patricia, wanting to hear her voice, wanting to make sure she was home before I surprised her. The phone had rung and rung, each tone tightening something in my chest. No answer. I'd frowned, thinking maybe she was busy helping prepare Christmas dinner, or maybe she was at church for the Christmas Eve service. I called again, then once more. Always the same. Silence on the other end. Or maybe not silence, but something worse. Rejection. The phone being deliberately ignored. A knot of unease had settled in my chest, spreading like poison through my excitement. I'd sent a text. "Mama's on her way, baby girl." "You home?" I stared at the screen, waiting for the little indicators that she'd read it, that she was typing a response. Nothing came. No read receipt. No typing bubbles. Just empty silence that felt wrong in a way I couldn't quite name. I tried to shake off the bad feeling, convincing myself she'd left her phone somewhere, or the battery had died, or she was busy with Christmas preparations. The flight from Atlanta to Birmingham had been quick, less than an hour in the air, but every minute had felt stretched and tense. I'd pressed my face against the cold airplane window, watching the lights of cities pass below, thinking about Christmas mornings when Patricia was small. How she'd wake me up before dawn, bouncing on my bed, unable to contain her excitement about Santa Claus. How we'd make hot chocolate together while opening presents, just the two of us, because her father had left when she was a baby, and it had always been us against the world. The plane had landed in Birmingham after dark, the winter night settling over the city like a heavy blanket. I dragged my duffel bag through the small regional airport, past families hugging and laughing, heading home for Christmas celebrations. A father carried his little girl on his shoulders while she clutched a candy cane and giggled with pure joy. I'd watched them, feeling a lump form in my throat, remembering when I used to carry Patricia like that through Christmas markets, her little hands pointing at lights and decorations, her voice filled with wonder at everything she saw. But now I was alone, pulling my heavy bag through the airport with an indescribable loneliness pressing down on me. I'd flagged a taxi outside, the cold hitting me immediately, and with a voice hoarse from the dry airplane air, I'd said, "Take me to Brookwood, Oak Street." On the way, traffic had been slow, the streets packed with people bundled in coats and scarves, heading to churches for Christmas Eve services. I'd stared out the taxi window at the warm lights glowing from houses along the road, at families visible through windows, gathering around trees and tables. Church bells rang faintly in the distance, mixing with the sound of a choir singing "O Holy Night" from somewhere nearby. I'd smiled despite my unease, picturing Patricia busy in the kitchen of her beautiful house, making the sweet potato casserole she'd learned from me, the recipe passed down from my own grandmother. When the car stopped at an intersection downtown, I'd glanced outside and spotted a group of police officers directing holiday traffic around a church where hundreds of people were arriving for midnight mass. Among the officers, I'd recognized a familiar face. Andre, a former student from my days teaching self-defense classes at the Birmingham Community Center before I'd moved up to coaching the national team. He stood tall and confident in his police uniform, directing cars with practiced efficiency, but he still had that same kind smile I remembered. I'd rolled down the window despite the cold and shouted over the traffic noise, "Andre." He'd turned, his eyes scanning the crowd before landing on me. Recognition lit up his face immediately. "Coach Coleman," he'd exclaimed, jogging over to the taxi, adjusting his police cap. "You're back in Birmingham." I'd smiled, trying to hide my exhaustion and the worry gnawing at my gut. "Yeah, just finished training in Atlanta. Still working traffic?" Andre had nodded, but then something had shifted in his expression. His smile had faded slightly, and a flicker of something, doubt, concern, maybe even fear, had passed through his eyes like a shadow. "Coach, you here for Christmas with family? With Patricia?" The way he'd said my daughter's name, with that slight hesitation, that careful tone, made my heart skip a beat. "Yes, heading to her place now." "Why?" "What's wrong, Andre? Something I should know?" He'd shaken his head, but his eyes had betrayed him, showing worry he couldn't quite hide. No, it's nothing, Coach Coleman. Just glad you're back. Birmingham missed you." But his voice had lacked conviction, and before I could press him further, the light had turned green, and cars behind us had started honking. Andre had stepped back, giving me a small wave that felt more like a warning than a goodbye. The taxi had pulled away, but I'd twisted in my seat to look back at him. He'd been standing there on the corner, watching our car disappear into traffic, his hands still raised, his face troubled. That moment had sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the December cold. Something was wrong. Andre knew something about Patricia, something bad enough that he couldn't bring himself to tell me on a busy street corner on Christmas Eve. The rest of the drive to Brookwood had been torture. I'd gripped my phone, debating whether to call Patricia again or to wait until I arrived. Every red light felt like an eternity. Every slow-moving car ahead of us made me want to jump out and run the rest of the way. The neighborhood where Patricia lived with Michael was upscale, the kind of area where lawyers and doctors and successful business people raise their families behind perfectly manicured lawns and security gates. The houses had grown larger as we'd driven deeper into Brookwood, each one more impressive than the last, decorated with tasteful Christmas lights and expensive wreaths. Patricia's house, the one Michael had insisted they buy even though it stretched their budget, sat on a corner lot, a 2-story colonial with white columns and a wraparound porch. In the summer, it probably looked like something from a magazine. Tonight, covered in a thin layer of ice, it looked cold and imposing. I'd paid the driver, grabbed my bag, and stood on the sidewalk, staring up at that house where warm light spilled from every window. It should have looked welcoming, festive, full of holiday cheer. Instead, something about it made my skin crawl, made every instinct I'd honed over decades of competition scream that danger waited inside. And then I'd heard it, that faint whimper from the porch, and I'd found Patricia. Now, standing in the Crawford family's living room with my daughter freezing in my arms, I looked at Michael with new eyes. This man I'd watched Patricia fall in love with, this man I'd welcomed into our family despite my reservations, this man had left my daughter outside to freeze while he celebrated with his family. "You need to leave," Thomas said, recovering his composure, his judge voice back in full force. "You've broken into this house, you're creating a disturbance, and if you don't leave immediately, I'll have you arrested for trespassing." "Arrested," I repeated, almost laughing at the absurdity. "By who? Andre? The officer who just saw me downtown and knows exactly where I was heading? The one who looked worried when I mentioned Patricia's name? Or maybe by one of your other friends in the Birmingham Police Department who owe you favors, Judge Crawford?" Margaret stood up, her face pinched with anger and something else, maybe embarrassment that their family's dirty secrets were being exposed. "How dare you come into our home and make accusations? Patricia is unstable. She's been causing problems for months. Michael has been incredibly patient with her." "Patient," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more threat than shouting. "Is that what you call leaving your wife outside in 28-degree weather? Patience?" Diana spoke up for the first time, her voice defensive and sharp. "You don't know what it's been like, living with Patricia's drama. She's been impossible, crying all the time, refusing to attend family functions, making Michael miserable." "Making Michael miserable," I repeated, looking at my son-in-law who couldn't quite meet my eyes. "Tell me, Diana, does your brother tell you why Patricia cries? Does he mention what happens behind closed doors?" Michael finally found his voice, straightening his shoulders, putting on the confident attorney persona I'd seen him use before. "This is between Patricia and me, Mother Coleman. It's a private marital matter, and frankly, it's none of your business." "None of my business," I said, my voice rising now despite my efforts to stay calm. "My daughter is hypothermic in my arms because of your family, and you're telling me it's none of my business?" Patricia stirred slightly against my shoulder, her voice barely a whisper. "Mama, please, let's just go. I don't want to fight." Those words, so weak and defeated, broke something inside me. This wasn't the Patricia I'd raised. The girl I knew had been strong, confident, full of fire. What had they done to her? I looked around the room one more time, memorizing every face, every expression. Thomas's barely concealed rage, Margaret's cold superiority, Diana's defensive hostility, Michael's calculated indifference. These people had broken my daughter, and they weren't even sorry about it. "You're right, baby girl," I said softly to Patricia. "We're leaving. But first, I need to make something very clear to the Crawford family." I turned to face them all, adjusting Patricia's weight in my arms. "You think you can treat my daughter like trash because she can't give you grandchildren? Because she's not living up to whatever perfect image you had in your minds? Let me tell you something about Patricia that maybe you never bothered to learn. She graduated top of her class in graphic design. She volunteers at the Children's Hospital every week, making art with kids who are scared and sick. She's kind and generous and funny and talented. But none of that matters to you, does it? Because she can't produce an heir for the precious Crawford legacy." Margaret gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "How dare you suggest that we—" "I dare because it's true," I interrupted. "I've heard what you say to her, Margaret. Patricia told me months ago how you comment on her failure as a wife, how you ask her constantly when she's going to give Michael children, how you compare her to Diana, who's been so successful at procreation." Thomas stepped forward, his face red with anger. "You need to leave this house right now, or I will call the police and have you forcibly removed." "Call them," I said calmly. "Please, call Birmingham PD and tell them that Judge Thomas Crawford needs officers to remove a woman whose only crime was rescuing her daughter from freezing to death on your porch. I'm sure that'll look great for your reputation." Thomas's hand, which had been reaching for his phone, paused. I saw the calculation in his eyes, the realization that this situation was already a disaster for the Crawford family's carefully maintained image. "And while we're calling people," I continued, "maybe I should call Channel 6 News. I bet they'd love a Christmas Eve story about a respected attorney's family leaving a woman outside in sub-freezing temperatures. What do you think, Michael? Would that help your partnership prospects at the firm? Michael's jaw tightened. You're threatening me? This is extortion. No, this is me protecting my daughter from people who've shown they have no regard for her well-being, her dignity, or her life. There's a difference. Patricia's trembling had lessened slightly in the warmth of the house, but she was still dangerously cold. I needed to get her to a hospital, get her checked out, make sure she hadn't suffered any permanent damage from her exposure. I'm taking Patricia now, I announced. She'll be staying with me at my hotel, and then we're going back to Atlanta. If any of you try to stop us, if Michael tries to claim some kind of spousal right to keep her here, I will make this the biggest scandal Birmingham has seen in years. You can't just take her, Michael protested, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. She's my wife, we're legally married. And she's legally allowed to leave any time she wants, I countered. Patricia, baby, do you want to stay here with these people, or do you want to come with me? Even in her weakened state, Patricia managed to speak clearly. I want to go with you, Mama. Please take me home. Those words were all I needed. I turned toward the broken door, carrying my daughter, but Thomas blocked my path one more time. If you leave with her, Juanita, if you interfere in their marriage, I will make your life very difficult. I still have friends in this city, connections you can't imagine. Your coaching career, your reputation, everything you've built, I can destroy it all. I looked at this man, this former judge, who thought his power made him untouchable, and I smiled. Not a friendly smile, but the smile of someone who'd fought her way through every obstacle life had thrown at her. Judge Crawford, I grew up in the Jim Crow South. I became a black woman, competing in a sport dominated by white men. I've faced discrimination, harassment, and obstacles you can't imagine. Your threats? They're nothing compared to what I've already survived. I stepped around him, carrying Patricia toward the door, but I stopped and looked back one more time. Oh, and Michael? You should know that Patricia called me 3 weeks ago. Late at night, crying so hard she could barely speak. She told me everything. The verbal abuse, the way you blame her for not getting pregnant, the way your family treats her like she's defective. The time you grabbed her arm so hard you left bruises she had to hide with long sleeves. Michael's face went white. Margaret gasped again. Thomas looked like he might have a stroke. She told me she wanted to leave, but was afraid you'd fight her, that your father would use his connections to make it impossible. That's why I came today, not just to surprise her, but to give her a way out. So thank you, actually, for making this easier by showing your true colors in front of everyone. I walked out of that house carrying Patricia, my boots crunching on the ice, leaving the Crawford family in stunned silence behind us. The cold air hit us again, but this time I was prepared. I wrapped Patricia tighter in my jacket and the extra sweater, shielding her face against my shoulder as I made my way to the street. I pulled out my phone with one hand, awkwardly balancing Patricia's weight, and called for a taxi, then immediately called Andre. He picked up on the first ring. Coach Coleman? Andre? I need your help. I'm at Patricia's house on Oak Street in Brookwood. I found her outside, hypothermic, while her husband and his family were inside having Christmas dinner. I need to get her to a hospital, but I also need a police report filed. Can you come? There was a pause, then Andre's voice came back firm and professional. I'm 10 minutes away. Stay with her. Don't let them take her back inside. I'm calling for an ambulance too. Thank you, Andre. I knew you were worried when I saw you downtown. I've been worried for weeks, Coach. I've responded to 2 domestic disturbance calls at that address in the past month. Both times, Patricia said everything was fine, and Michael convinced the responding officers it was just a misunderstanding, but I knew something was wrong. The taxi arrived first, and I carefully placed Patricia in the back seat, continuing to hold her close to share body heat. Her shivering had intensified now that her body was warming up, which I knew from my first aid training was actually a good sign. It meant her core temperature was rising, her body fighting back against the cold that had tried to claim her. "Mama," Patricia whispered, her voice still weak but clearer than before. "I'm so sorry. I should have left sooner. I should have been stronger." "Hush now," I said, stroking her damp hair. "This isn't your fault. None of this is your fault. You hear me, baby girl? What they did to you, how they treated you, that's on them, not you." The ambulance arrived minutes later, lights flashing red and blue against the ice-covered street. Andre pulled up right behind it in his patrol car. He approached the taxi, his face grave with concern when he saw Patricia's condition. "Jesus, Coach, how long was she out there?" "I don't know. Maybe an hour, maybe longer." They were inside celebrating Christmas while she froze. Andre's jaw tightened. That's criminal negligence at minimum, possibly attempted voluntary manslaughter depending on intent. I'm going to need to take statements from everyone. The paramedics took over, carefully transferring Patricia to a stretcher, checking her vital signs, wrapping her in thermal blankets. "Core temperature is 93.2 degrees, one of them said. "Moderate hypothermia. We need to get her to UAB hospital immediately." "I'm riding with her," I said, not asking permission but stating fact. The paramedic nodded. "Family?" "I'm her mother." As they loaded Patricia into the ambulance, Michael came running out of the house, suddenly concerned now that police and emergency vehicles were creating a scene in front of his expensive home. "Wait, what's happening?" "Patricia." "Where are they taking you?" Patricia's eyes opened, focusing on her husband with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. Not fear, not sadness, but something cold and final. "Away from you," she said, her voice stronger than I'd heard it all night. "Don't come to the hospital, Michael. Don't call. Don't text. I'm done." "You can't just leave," Michael protested, looking between Andre and me like we were conspirators in some plot against him. "We're married. We took vows." Andre stepped forward, his hand resting on his belt near his handcuffs, in a gesture that was both casual and threatening. "Mr. Crawford, I'm going to need you to step back. Your wife is receiving medical attention for hypothermia, a condition she developed while on your property, under your care. I have questions about how that happened." "This is ridiculous," Michael said, but his lawyer instincts were kicking in now. "I'm not answering any questions without my attorney present." "That's your right," Andre said calmly. "But I will be filing a report, and I will be forwarding this case to the Domestic Violence Unit. They'll be in touch." I climbed into the ambulance with Patricia, leaving Michael standing on his perfect lawn in his perfect neighborhood, watching his perfect life start to crumble. The ride to UAB hospital was tense. The paramedics worked efficiently, monitoring Patricia's vitals, slowly warming her core temperature, administering IV fluids. I held her hand the entire time, feeling life and strength gradually return to her grip. At the hospital, they rushed her into the emergency department. Doctors and nurses swarmed around her, asking questions, running tests, taking her temperature repeatedly to track her recovery. I stayed by her side through all of it, answering questions when Patricia couldn't, providing medical history, explaining how I'd found her. After what felt like hours but was probably only 90 minutes, a doctor approached me in the waiting area where I'd been pacing. She was a middle-aged black woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that reminded me of my own mother. "Mrs. Coleman?" "Yes, that's me." "How is she?" "Your daughter is going to be fine. We've got her core temperature back up to 97.8 degrees, which is still slightly low but well out of danger. Her fingers and toes show no signs of frostbite, which is fortunate." Another hour in those conditions, though, and we'd be looking at a very different outcome. Relief flooded through me so powerfully I had to sit down. "Thank God, can I see her?" "In a few minutes, yes. But first, I need to talk to you about something concerning." The doctor gestured to a private consultation room, and we stepped inside. She closed the door and pulled out a tablet, showing me Patricia's medical records. "Mrs. Coleman, when we were examining your daughter, we found evidence of old bruising on her upper arms and ribs. The pattern is consistent with someone grabbing her forcefully, repeatedly over time. There's also significant weight loss from her last recorded visit 6 months ago, about 25 pounds, which suggests either an eating disorder or chronic stress affecting her appetite." My hands clenched into fists. I'd suspected abuse, but hearing it confirmed by medical professionals made it real in a way that pierced through my heart like a blade. "Her husband," I said, my voice tight with barely controlled rage, "Michael Crawford." The doctor nodded grimly. "I thought as much. We're required by Alabama law to report suspected domestic violence to authorities. I've already contacted the police liaison. They'll want to photograph the bruising and include it in their investigation." "Good," I said. "I want everything documented. Every bruise, every mark, every sign of what they did to her." "There's something else," the doctor continued, her voice softening. "Patricia told the nurse she's been unable to conceive. She's been seeing a fertility specialist who told her that severe emotional stress can impact reproductive health. The psychological pressure she's been under may have actually contributed to her infertility, which in turn has been used against her. It's a vicious cycle." I closed my eyes, feeling tears burn behind my eyelids. My baby girl had been trapped in hell, her body breaking down under the weight of cruelty, blamed for a condition that the abuse itself might have caused. "Can I see her now?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Yes, of course. She's asking for you." I followed the doctor to Patricia's room. My daughter lay in a hospital bed, wrapped in warming blankets, an IV in her arm, but her eyes were open and clear. When she saw me, tears started streaming down her face. "Mama," she whispered. "I'm so sorry I didn't tell you how bad it got. I was ashamed. I thought I could fix it, thought if I just tried harder, was better, that Michael would love me again." I rushed to her bedside, taking her hand carefully, mindful of the IV. "Baby girl, you have nothing to be ashamed of. Nothing. What happened to you is not your fault. You didn't fail your marriage. Your marriage failed you. But I couldn't give him children," Patricia said, the words that had clearly been used as weapons against her for so long. "His family kept saying I was broken, defective, that I was ruining their family line. Maybe they were right." "Stop," I said firmly, using my coaching voice, the one that commanded attention. "Patricia Ann Coleman, you listen to me right now. Your worth as a human being has nothing to do with your ability to have children. Nothing. You are brilliant, talented, kind, and strong. Any man who can't see that doesn't deserve you. But Michael said, I don't care what Michael said. I don't care what his parents said. I don't care what any of those people think. They're wrong, and more than that, they're cruel. And cruelty doesn't get to define you." Patricia's tears fell harder, but they seemed different now, like something was releasing, some poison being drained from a wound. I wanted to leave so many times, but I was scared. Michael said if I left, his father would make sure I never worked in Birmingham again, that they'd tell everyone I was unstable, that they'd ruin my reputation. "Let them try," I said fiercely. "Your reputation is built on years of good work, of kindness, of integrity. Their lies can't touch that. And if they try to spread rumors, we'll fight back with the truth. We'll tell everyone exactly what they did to you." A knock on the door interrupted us. Andre stepped in, still in his police uniform, holding a notebook. "Patricia, Coach Coleman, I'm sorry to intrude, but I need to take a formal statement while everything is fresh. Is that okay?" Patricia looked at me, and I nodded encouragingly. "It's okay, baby. Tell him everything. Don't leave anything out. Don't minimize it. Don't protect them. Just tell the truth." For the next hour, Patricia told her story. How the Crawford family had welcomed her at first, back when she and Michael were dating, when they thought she was the perfect future daughter-in-law, educated, accomplished, presentable. How things had changed after the wedding, when the pressure to produce grandchildren began almost immediately. How every month that passed without a pregnancy announcement brought more pointed comments, more criticism, more disappointment. She told Andre about the fertility treatments she'd undergone, the hormones that made her emotional and physically ill, the procedures that were painful and invasive and ultimately unsuccessful. About how Michael had started blaming her, saying she wasn't trying hard enough, wasn't staying positive enough, was sabotaging their chances with her stress and anxiety. She described the first time he'd grabbed her arm hard enough to leave bruises, shouting at her after another negative pregnancy test. How he'd apologized the next day, blamed his stress, promised it wouldn't happen again. But it had happened again. And again. The physical abuse had been sporadic, but the emotional abuse was constant. Margaret's comments about her failure as a wife, Thomas's cold disappointment, Diana's smug superiority, flaunting her own children, making sure Patricia knew she was the lesser daughter-in-law. And tonight, Andre asked gently, "What happened tonight that led to you being outside?" Patricia's voice shook as she recounted the evening, how she'd been helping prepare Christmas dinner, trying to be useful, when Margaret had made another comment about how sad it was that there would be no grandchildren to pass the family traditions to, looking directly at Patricia as she said it. How Patricia had finally broken down, crying in the kitchen, unable to take it anymore. How Michael had told her she was ruining Christmas with her emotions, that she needed to get control of herself. "I said I couldn't do this anymore, that I was tired of being treated like I was broken," Patricia said. "And Michael said if I couldn't act like a proper wife, then I could wait outside until I was ready to apologize and rejoin the family properly." "And his parents?" Andre asked. "They agreed with him. Margaret said I was being dramatic and that some fresh air would do me good, so Michael took my coat and told me to sit on the porch until I was ready to be reasonable." "How long were you out there?" "I don't know. It felt like forever. I tried the door after a while, but Michael had locked it. I knocked, but no one came. I could hear them laughing inside, hear the music, smell the food. I thought maybe they forgot about me, or maybe this was a test, or maybe this was just what my life was going to be. I was so cold and so tired, and at some point, I just stopped feeling anything. Then Mama was there." Andre finished writing, his face grim. "Patricia, based on what you've told me and what the medical evidence shows, I'm going to recommend charges of domestic assault, false imprisonment, and criminal negligence, causing bodily harm. The DA's office will make the final decision, but with your testimony, the medical evidence, and Coach Coleman's witness statement, I think we have a strong case." Patricia looked frightened. "Michael will be so angry. His father will use his connections." "Let them try," Andre said firmly. "Judge Crawford retired 5 years ago. His connections aren't what they used to be, and I know for a fact that the current DA has no love for him. Plus, domestic violence cases are taken seriously now in a way they weren't back when Thomas Crawford was on the bench. Times have changed." I squeezed Patricia's hand. "You're not alone in this, baby girl. I'm here, Andre's here, and we're going to make sure you're safe." Patricia was released from the hospital the following morning, Christmas Day, with instructions to rest, stay warm, and follow up with her primary care physician within a week. I'd already checked us both into a hotel near the hospital, a clean, comfortable place where Patricia could recover without fear of Michael showing up. Andre had posted an officer outside Patricia's hospital room overnight, just in case the Crawfords tried anything, but they'd stayed away. Smart on their part, since any attempt at contact could be construed as witness intimidation. As we settled into the hotel room, Patricia on one bed and me on the other, I watched my daughter stare at the ceiling, her face unreadable. She'd been quiet since we'd left the hospital, processing everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. Her entire life had changed in one night, her marriage effectively over, her future uncertain. "Mama," she finally said, her voice small. "What do I do now?" "Everything I built in Birmingham, my job, my friends, my whole life, it's all connected to Michael and his family. Then we build you a new life," I said simply. "You come to Atlanta with me. You stay as long as you need to. You figure out what you want, not what anyone else expects from you. But my job, baby, you're a talented graphic designer. You can work from anywhere, freelance if you need to, or find a new firm in Atlanta. There are more opportunities there than in Birmingham anyway. What about the house? All my things? We'll get your things. Andre said he can escort us to the house with another officer present to make sure there's no confrontation. You take what's yours, what matters to you, and leave the rest." Patricia's eyes filled with tears again. "I feel like such a failure. I'm 32 years old, and I'm running back to my mother like a child." I moved to sit beside her on the bed, putting my arm around her shoulders. "Patricia, you're not running. You're escaping. There's a difference. You're surviving something that could have killed you, literally. That's not failure, that's strength. I don't feel strong. I feel weak and broken and used up. You feel that way because that's what they wanted you to feel. That's how abusers work, baby. They break down your self-worth until you believe you're nothing without them, but it's a lie. You were someone before Michael, and you'll be someone after him, someone better, stronger, more yourself." Over the next few days, the story spread through Birmingham like wildfire. Someone, probably one of the Crawfords' neighbors, had taken photos of the ambulance and police cars outside the house on Christmas Eve. Those photos ended up on social media with captions asking what had happened. Local news picked it up, especially after Andre's police report became public record. Prominent attorney's wife hospitalized on Christmas Eve after alleged domestic incident, read the headline in the Birmingham News. The article was carefully worded to avoid libel, but the implications were clear. The comment sections exploded with people who'd known Michael and Patricia, some defending the Crawfords, but many more sharing their own observations about how Patricia had seemed increasingly isolated and unhappy over the years. One comment that particularly struck me came from a woman named Jennifer, who identified herself as Patricia's former coworker. "I worked with Patricia at Design Hub for 3 years. She was brilliant, creative, always willing to help others, but over the past year, she changed. She lost weight, stopped socializing, made excuses not to attend after-work events. When I asked if she was okay, she always said she was fine, just busy. I wish I'd pushed harder. I wish I'd seen what was really happening." Reading that, Patricia started crying again. Jenny was my friend. She tried to reach out, and I pushed her away because Michael said I was spending too much time with work people and not enough time with his family. "That's called isolation," I explained. "It's a classic abuse tactic. Cut you off from your support system so you're completely dependent on the abuser." 3 days after Christmas, with Andre and another officer present, we went to collect Patricia's belongings from the house on Oak Street. Michael wasn't there. His lawyer had advised him to stay away, but Margaret was, standing in the foyer like a disapproving statue, watching as Patricia packed her personal items. "You're making a terrible mistake," Margaret said as Patricia boxed up her art supplies. "Michael loves you. This family has given you everything." Patricia stopped packing and looked at her mother-in-law with eyes that were no longer afraid. "Mrs. Crawford, your son left me outside to freeze on Christmas Eve. Your family blamed me for a medical condition I can't control. You made me feel worthless every single day. If that's your definition of love, I want nothing to do with it." "You're ungrateful," Margaret spat. "We welcomed you into this family, and this is how you repay us? By humiliating us publicly?" "I didn't humiliate you," Patricia said calmly. "You humiliated yourselves by your own actions. I just survived them." Margaret's face reddened with rage. "Thomas will make sure you regret this. He has friends in every courthouse, every law firm, every business in this city." "Good," I interjected, stepping between Margaret and my daughter. "Let him try. Because while he's doing that, we'll be talking to every news outlet that will listen. We'll be sharing the medical reports, the police statements, the photographs of Patricia's bruises. We'll be telling the truth about how the respectable Crawford family treats women who don't live up to their expectations. How does that sound for the family reputation?" Margaret opened her mouth, then closed it, apparently realizing that threats weren't working anymore. She turned and walked upstairs, her heels clicking angrily on the hardwood. We finished packing in silence, loading Patricia's belongings into my rental car. Clothes, books, her art portfolio, photographs from before her marriage when she still smiled freely, her grandmother's jewelry that I'd given her on her 21st birthday. We left behind the expensive furniture Michael had insisted on buying, the wedding china from his family, the entire life they'd built together that had never really been hers. As we drove away from that house for the last time, Patricia didn't look back. She stared straight ahead, her hands folded in her lap, and said quietly, "I'm free." The legal proceedings moved forward. The district attorney's office, after reviewing the evidence, charged Michael Crawford with domestic assault and criminal negligence. Thomas Crawford's connections couldn't make the charges disappear, not with the medical evidence, the photographs, Patricia's testimony, and the growing public attention. Michael's law firm, concerned about their reputation, placed him on indefinite administrative leave. The case was assigned to Judge Victoria Harrison, a black woman in her 50s who'd fought her own battles against the Old Boys Network in Birmingham's legal system. I sat in the courtroom during the preliminary hearing, watching as Michael's expensive lawyers tried to paint Patricia as unstable, as mentally ill, as someone whose testimony couldn't be trusted. They brought up her struggles with infertility, suggesting she'd been on fertility hormones that affected her mental state, that she'd been depressed and irrational. Patricia's lawyer, a fierce woman named Sandra Martinez who specialized in domestic violence cases, destroyed that narrative with medical expert testimony. A psychiatrist explained how abuse victims often show symptoms of depression and anxiety as a result of their trauma, not as a pre-existing condition. The fertility specialist testified that Patricia's inability to conceive was likely multifactorial and that chronic stress from emotional abuse could absolutely impact reproductive health. The emergency room doctor walked the judge through Patricia's injuries, the bruising patterns, the severity of her hypothermia. Judge Harrison listened to everything with an impassive face, taking notes, occasionally asking sharp questions that made Michael's lawyers sweat. When it was Patricia's turn to testify, I watched my daughter walk to the witness stand with her head high. She wore a simple blue dress, her hair pulled back, no makeup to hide the fact that she'd been crying. She looked fragile but determined, and when she started speaking, her voice didn't waver. She told her story simply, factually, without dramatic embellishment. She described the progression of abuse, the isolation, the criticism, the physical violence, and finally, that Christmas Eve when she'd been left outside to freeze. Michael's lawyer tried to rattle her during cross-examination, suggesting she was exaggerating, that she'd chosen to go outside, that she could have come back in at any time. Patricia's response was devastating in its simplicity. "The door was locked," she said. "I tried it multiple times. I knocked. No one came." I sat there getting colder and colder, thinking about whether anyone would even notice if I died out there, and I realized they probably wouldn't, not until it was convenient for them. The courtroom was silent after that. Even Michael's lawyer seemed shaken. Judge Harrison called a recess, and when she returned, her decision was clear. "Mr. Crawford, I'm ordering you to stay at least 500 feet away from Miss Coleman at all times. You are not to contact her directly or indirectly through family, friends, or social media." The criminal charges will proceed to trial, and I'm setting bail at $50,000 with GPS monitoring. If you violate the protective order in any way, you will be remanded to custody immediately." Michael's face was ashen as the judge spoke. His father, Thomas, sitting in the gallery, looked like he'd aged 10 years. The mighty Crawford family was discovering that money and connections couldn't fix everything, especially when the evidence was overwhelming, and the judge was someone who'd faced down powerful men her entire career. As we left the courthouse, reporters swarmed us. Patricia, on Sandra's advice, didn't speak to them, but I did. I stood on those courthouse steps, looked directly into the cameras, and said what needed to be said. My daughter nearly died on Christmas Eve because a family with wealth and status thought they could treat her as less than human. But she survived, and now she's standing up for herself and for every other woman who's been abused, isolated, and made to feel worthless. The Crawford family may have power in this city, but they don't have the power to silence the truth. That clip played on every local news station and went viral online. My phone started ringing with interview requests from regional and even national news outlets. Domestic violence advocates reached out, wanting to feature Patricia's story. Other women started coming forward with their own experiences of abuse in Birmingham's wealthy social circles, emboldened by Patricia's courage. The Crawford family tried to fight back in the court of public opinion, releasing a statement through their lawyer claiming Patricia was mentally unstable and that they'd been trying to help her. But it backfired spectacularly when Jennifer, Patricia's former co-worker, organized a group of Patricia's friends and colleagues to hold a press conference supporting her. They brought photos of Patricia from before and after her marriage, showing the visible deterioration, the weight loss, the sadness that had crept into her eyes. They shared stories of how the Crawfords had systematically isolated Patricia, making her feel like she couldn't maintain friendships outside the family. One woman, Sarah, who'd been Patricia's roommate in college, told a story that made me cry. Patricia was the strongest person I knew in school. She stood up to professors who underestimated her. She fought for other students who were being treated unfairly. She was fearless. Watching what that marriage did to her, seeing her become smaller and quieter and more afraid, it was like watching someone disappear. I tried to reach out so many times, but she always said she was fine. I wish I'd understood what was really happening. Patricia and I moved to Atlanta in February, 2 months after that Christmas Eve. She moved into my apartment temporarily while looking for her own place. The change of scenery was good for her. She didn't have to worry about running into Michael or his family at the grocery store, didn't have to avoid certain restaurants or neighborhoods, didn't have to live with constant reminders of her trauma. She started therapy with a specialist in domestic violence recovery, attending sessions twice a week at first, then once a week as she began to heal. The therapist helped her understand that what she'd experienced wasn't just one bad relationship, but a systematic pattern of coercive control. That the Crawford family had groomed her, in a sense, making her feel like she was the problem, like she needed to try harder, be better, deserve their acceptance. Patricia began to see how her own strengths, the qualities that had made her successful and independent before marriage, had been slowly eroded until she didn't trust her own judgment anymore. Andre visited often, making the 2-hour drive from Birmingham on his days off. At first, I thought he was just being a good friend, checking on Patricia as part of his protective instincts as an officer. But watching them together, I saw something deeper developing. The way he looked at her, not with pity but with respect. The way he listened when she talked, really listened, without trying to fix her or tell her how she should feel. The way he made her laugh, something I hadn't heard nearly enough in the past few years. One evening in March, after Andre had left to drive back to Birmingham, Patricia came to sit with me on the balcony of my apartment. We watched the Atlanta skyline light up as the sun set, sipping tea in comfortable silence. "Mama," she finally said, "I need to tell you something." I braced myself, worried that she was going to say she was going back to Michael, that she'd been worn down by the legal battle or missed her old life. "I think I'm falling in love with Andre," she said instead, her voice tentative but also hopeful in a way I hadn't heard in years, "and it terrifies me." "Why does it terrify you, baby?" "Because what if I'm broken now? What if Michael and his family damaged me so badly that I can't have a healthy relationship? What if I just keep choosing men who hurt me?" I turned to face her, taking her hands in mine. "Patricia, the fact that you're afraid of that shows you're not broken. You're aware, you're healing, and Andre isn't Michael. You know that, right?" "I know he's kind," Patricia said. "I know he makes me feel safe. I know when I'm with him, I don't feel like I have to be perfect or perform or earn his affection, but I'm scared to trust that feeling. Trust takes time," I told her. "You don't have to rush into anything. Andre seems like a good man who's willing to wait while you heal, to let you set the pace. That's what healthy love looks like. Is it wrong that sometimes I feel guilty, like I should be sadder about my marriage ending? Sometimes I'm just relieved, and then I feel bad for feeling relieved." "Relief is a perfectly normal response to escaping abuse," I assured her. "You're allowed to be happy that it's over. You're allowed to celebrate your freedom. The sadness will come too, grieving for what you hoped that marriage would be. But relief, gratitude, even joy, those are all valid feelings too." Michael's trial took place in June, 6 months after that Christmas Eve. Patricia returned to Birmingham for it, staying at a hotel with me and Andre, who'd taken vacation days to support her through the process. The trial lasted 3 days. The prosecution presented their case methodically. Medical evidence, photographs, police reports, testimony from neighbors who'd heard arguments, from Patricia's friends who'd witnessed her isolation. Andre testified about responding to domestic disturbance calls at the house, about finding Patricia hypothermic on the porch. The defense tried to argue that Michael's actions, while perhaps misguided, didn't rise to the level of criminal assault. They painted him as a frustrated husband dealing with an emotionally unstable wife, someone who'd made a mistake in judgment but hadn't intended serious harm. The jury didn't buy it. After deliberating for less than 4 hours, they returned with a guilty verdict on both counts, domestic assault and criminal negligence. Judge Harrison sentenced Michael to 18 months in jail with the possibility of parole after 9 months, plus mandatory completion of a batterer intervention program and 5 years probation. It wasn't a long sentence, but it was something. It was accountability. Thomas Crawford stood up in the courtroom, his face red with fury, and started shouting about injustice, about how his son was being railroaded. Judge Harrison calmly ordered him removed from the courtroom. As bailiffs escorted the former judge out, I heard him yelling about appeals, about connections, about how this wasn't over, but it was over. The Crawford family's reputation in Birmingham was destroyed. Michael's legal career was finished. And most importantly, Patricia was free. The divorce was finalized in September, exactly 9 months after I'd kicked down that door on Christmas Eve. Patricia got half the equity in the house, her car, and a settlement that gave her financial stability to start over. She didn't ask for alimony, didn't want to be tied to Michael in any way. She just wanted to close that chapter of her life and move forward. By then, she'd found her own apartment in Atlanta, a bright 1-bedroom with big windows and exposed brick walls that she'd decorated with her artwork. She'd started freelancing, building a client base, rediscovering her creativity. She'd gained back the weight she'd lost, started exercising, joined a women's support group for domestic violence survivors. And she'd let herself fall in love with Andre, slowly and carefully, with the support of her therapist and with clear communication about her fears and boundaries. Andre had been patient, making the drive from Birmingham to Atlanta every weekend, never pressuring her, always respecting her pace. In October, he accepted a job with the Atlanta Police Department, a promotion to detective in their domestic violence unit. I want to help other people the way I helped you. And Patricia, he told me when he asked my blessing to move to Atlanta. I want to make a difference. On Thanksgiving, almost a year after that terrible Christmas Eve, Patricia and Andre came to my apartment for dinner. We cooked together, the three of us in my small kitchen, laughing and talking and making a mess. Patricia made sweet potato casserole from my grandmother's recipe. Andre contributed his mother's mac and cheese. I roasted a small turkey, nothing elaborate, just enough for us. As we sat down to eat, holding hands around my table, Patricia said grace. Thank you for this food, for this family we've chosen, for second chances and new beginnings. Thank you for my mama who saved my life. Thank you for Andre who showed me what real love looks like. And thank you for the strength to survive what tried to destroy me. We ate and laughed and told stories. Later, as Andre was doing dishes and Patricia was packing up leftovers, she pulled me aside. Mama, I need to tell you something. She held out her left hand, and I saw a simple silver ring on her finger. Andre proposed last night. Nothing fancy, just the two of us in my apartment, and he told me he loved me exactly as I am, that he'd wait as long as I needed, but that he wanted to build a life with me if I wanted that too. And what did you say? I asked, though I could see the answer in her glowing face. I said yes. Not right away. We're going to have a long engagement, at least a year. I want to be sure I'm healthy enough, ready enough. But Mama, I want this. I want a life with someone who sees me, really sees me, who values me. Is that okay? I pulled her into a hug, tears streaming down my face. Baby girl, it's more than okay. It's everything I wanted for you. As I stood in my kitchen that Thanksgiving evening, watching Patricia and Andre together, so comfortable and natural and happy, I thought about that Christmas Eve almost a year ago. About kicking down that door, about holding my freezing daughter in my arms, about not knowing if we'd make it through. We'd not only made it through, we'd come out stronger. Patricia had reclaimed herself, found love that honored rather than diminished her. And I'd learned that sometimes the greatest gift a mother can give is not protection from pain, but the courage to fight through it. Patricia is standing now, strong, healing, loved, and that's the best Christmas gift I could ever receive. That is Juanita Coleman's story. Now I want to hear from you. Where are you watching this from? What city? What country? Drop it in the comments below. I love seeing our global community come together over these stories about family abuse, domestic violence, and the moment when a mother has to fight to save her daughter's life. Real question. If you were Juanita, what would you have done? Would you have kicked down that door? Would you have confronted the Crawford family in their own home? Or would you have tried to handle it quietly to avoid making waves? Tell me in the comments. Hit that like button if this story made you feel something. Share it if you know someone trapped in an abusive relationship, someone whose family doesn't see the warning signs, someone who needs to know that escape is possible and that they deserve better than being treated like they're worthless. And subscribe for more raw, real stories about domestic violence survivors, mothers who fight for their daughters, families who use wealth and status to hide abuse, and what happens when someone finally says enough is enough and kicks down the door to save a life. Thanks for watching. Sometimes the people who seem to have everything are suffering in silence behind closed doors. Sometimes being polite and keeping the peace means letting someone you love freeze to death. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is make noise, cause a scene, and refuse to let cruelty hide behind respectability. And sometimes the only way to save someone is to literally kick down the door. See you in the next video.